First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6 is Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to Nigel Farage, voted by you as the nation's best news presenter at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. It's been a troubling few days for those of us who believe in free expression. On the one hand, more instances of banks mysteriously closing accounts with those who express a wrong thinking have emerged. And on the other, the press regulator Ipso has bowed to the mob, upholding that Jeremy Clarkson's Meghan Markle column was sexist. Free speech must include the freedom to offend and must always extend to those with whom we disagree. Meanwhile, new polling has revealed how unpopular the government's plans to ban new petrol and diesel cars by 2030 are, exposing the net zero agenda for the elitist enterprise that it is. The Daily Mail revealed only 1 in 4 people are behind the government scheme, set to take effect in 7 years. Newsflash, people don't want to be cold or poor. And we may now know why the Bank of England is so inept: gender ideology. The Times has obtained the bank's submission to Stonewall, the top 100 employer list, and it has revealed the bank believes that people of any gender can be pregnant. Well, if Mr. Bailey believes in such magic, perhaps he could start identifying as an effective governor. Plus, we'll be brushing up the ashes after this weekend's fiery display at Lord's, after the Australian team found themselves heckled by English fans. But does the law trump courtesy? State of the Nation starts now. We'll also be joined by a spirited panel this evening, historian Dr. David Starkey and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicol. As ever, I want to hear from you. It's the most important part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. The Lord Chancellor Alex Chalk is asking the Parole Board to reconsider its decision to allow the double child killer Colin Pitchfork to be released from prison. The Parole Board ruled last month that Pitchfork could be freed. He was jailed for life in the 1980s for raping and strangling two 15-year-old girls, Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. He was told to serve a minimum term of 30 years, later reduced to 28 for good behaviour. Lord Chalk says it's absolutely vital offenders are kept behind bars and says there's a chance the board's decision was irrational. Drivers paid nearly £1 billion more for their fuel at supermarket filling stations last year after supermarkets increased their profit margins. An investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority has found that drivers paid an extra 6 pence per litre for their fuel. The Chancellor supports the CMA's call for a cheapest fuel finder website, which could help motorists find the best and nearest fuel options on their phones, in-car sat-navs. Nearly 4,000 migrants crossed the English Channel in June, which is the highest monthly figure for the last 5 years. Migrant crossings set a new record last month, pushing the total for the year so far to more than 11,000. The figure comes almost 6 months after Rishi Sunak vowed to stop the boats as one of his cabinet's chief objectives. Downing Street insists discussions on NHS pay and conditions can't be held unless strikes are called off. The British Medical Association says doctors could continue to strike over the next few years if their demands are not met. Junior doctors are planning 5 days of strike action from the 13th to the 18th of this month, and consultants are walking out on the 20th and 21st. And rail passengers are being warned of disruption as train drivers refuse to work overtime this week. Services with 16 train operators will be running a limited service until Saturday as representatives continue to argue over pay. ASLEF says its members at 15 train operators will take part in industrial action from the 17th to the 22nd of this month. Now, in France, town halls and municipal buildings have been attacked during 6 days of riots across the country. The mayor and residents of Persan in northern France came together in an anti-violence rally where their town hall had been set alight by rioters. 100 more arrests were made following the death of 17-year-old pizza delivery boy Naël Mouzouk, who was shot dead by police at a traffic stop in Paris last week. And King Charles has begun his first Holyrood week since his coronation. Charles was welcomed by crowds at Kinneil House, Bowness, Falkirk. That's the historic home of the Dukes of Hamilton. The annual tradition, also known as Royal Week, sees the monarch immersing themselves in Scottish culture and heritage. On TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News. Back now to Jacob.
The great Liberal MP, yes, there can and were once great Liberals of the 19th century, John Stuart Mill, once said in his essay on liberty, "If all mankind minus one were of one opinion and only one person were of the contrary opinion, mankind would be no more justified in silencing that one person than he, if he had the power, would be justified in silencing mankind." He went on to explain, if the opinion is right, society is deprived of the opportunity of exchanging error for truth. If wrong, they lose. What is almost as great a benefit? The clearer perception and livelier impression of truth produced by its collision with error. Well, it seems these words have been lost through the passage of time. Last week, my fellow GB News presenter Nigel Farage revealed that his bank accounts were being closed for no obvious reason. But this was not the first time. Toby Young of the Free Speech Union had his PayPal account inexplicably closed last year, and it was only after a media campaign that they were reinstated. Last week, we discussed this issue with a representative of a Christian charity who had had its accounts closed, and yet another example emerged over the weekend regarding an Anglican vicar having his account closed after a disagreement about the bank's support for Pride. This is something Mill discussed in his work. Censorship does not just come from the government, it comes from the society's mob mentality and the institutions infected by it. Not enough to protect people from the censorship imposed by the government, people must also have protection from institutions and the tyranny of a prevailing consensus, which can often turn out to be wrong. It's encouraging to see that the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has warned banks against this behaviour, and we will be discussing this later in the evening. But another blow to the great tradition of free expression occurred over the weekend. The press regulator, Ipso, ruled that Jeremy Clarkson's undeniably distasteful article about the Duchess of Sussex in December last year was misogynistic and ordered The Sun to publish its ruling. This ruling is wrong both technically and in principle. As Fraser Nelson brilliantly points out in The Telegraph, the ruling puts the regulator in violation of its own charter. It had previously insisted that it would not regulate opinion and that complaints would be based on factual inaccuracies. This precedent now positions the regulator as a judge of taste rather than just of fact. And as a matter of fact, the ruling denied complaints regarding the actual factual accuracy of the article. So it was factually not a question of accuracy, it was a question of taste. And the Charter has also been broken because it says complaints can only be taken forward from the party directly affected. But now it has upheld a complaint made by people on another person's behalf. It is effectively paving the way for a repeatedly braying mob to have its way, to force people to apologise for opinions. And I've got no doubt that Mr. Clarkson's article was rude and distasteful, but that's my opinion. And my opinion is irrelevant. And it's irrelevant what the complainants think, because the principle of free speech means he ought to be allowed to say what he wants. And it becomes defunct once it's not extended to those whose views are seen as unpalatable. Because soon enough, it'll be you that the mob considers unpalatable and your views. John Milton, the first real hero, I suppose, of free speech, though he was on the wrong side of the Civil War, but leaving that to one side, said, "I cannot praise a fugitive and cloistered virtue, unexercised and unbreathed, that never sallies out and sees her adversary. Free speech requires the battle of ideas," which Milton was advocating. I want to know what you think. mailmog@gbnews.com. I'm delighted to be joined by my panel, historian Dr. David Starkey and author and broadcaster Amy Nicol, who seemed to get along so well last week. Amy, come on, Ipso's attack on freedom of speech is appalling, isn't it, and undermines its own charter?
I think that you are intellectually capable enough to recognise that this was not to do with freedom of speech and this was a misogynistic piece of work. He named 3 women in that attack. He attacked Meghan Markle based on her femininity, and that's the problem.
He attacked her because he hated her.
Yeah, OK.
But he doesn't hate her as a woman.
David.
He hates her because she's detestable.
Do let Amy get a word in.
Absolutely valid. But then why did he put her along with 3 other women? When we live in a society where one woman is killed every 3 days by her partner,
but this is
we have but it's not. It's linked. It's linked. You're fueling this hatred, this acceptable misogyny. There's acceptable misogyny in every area of life, and that's why Ipso has clamped down on it. It's not because of freedom of speech. We have a very free society.
Well, we don't anymore.
Which is why you can make your monologue and we can share our opinions. And I think it's overreach to suggest otherwise.
But Ipso was overreached by criticising the Clarkson article. It was nasty, it was unpleasant. I would never have written any such thing.
But what's the word that they've used? Misogynistic.
They have upheld a complaint, and on 2 grounds they shouldn't have done it. One, it's opinion. His opinion, he doesn't like the Duchess of Sussex. And secondly, she didn't complain herself.
That would be fine if he had said, Jacob Rees-Mogg, David Starkey and Meghan Markle. He didn't. He named 3 women and attacked her purely based on her femininity, which is under the Equalities Act hateful.
This is absurd. This, simply, Jacob, is absurd.
It's surprising that
it's absurd at several levels. We haven't actually mentioned 2 of the most important facts. The first is that Clarkson's piece was manifestly satire. It was in a tradition...
Was it a newspaper?
You got cross with me for interrupting. I barely began speaking.
OK.
Let me just continue. It was satire.
We need a conscience.
It was coarse, vulgar satire. As satire often is. The great... You referred to the 17th century. Look at the great satirical tradition of the 18th century. This was mocking a woman who, Meghan Markle, like her husband. I would be equally happy to mock her husband. They are self-righteous, they are prissy, they are self-indulgent, and frankly, they do need mud throwing at them. I wouldn't go as far as... just one second. I wouldn't go as far as the other substance. Right, so it's satire. And satire seems to me to be something that's precious and that we need to defend. The second thing is that you haven't mentioned is why this happened. This happened because of a Twitter storm. What has now happened? We suddenly have a really you talked about a mob as though this were back in the 17th and the 18th century. This is a new sort of mob, an ultra-dangerous mob. It's the mob which Barry Weiss, when she was forced out of the New York Times, described as the thing that is now the real editor of the New York Times. It is the Twitter mob and the pile-on. What this case shows is the new censor of the press is Twitter. This is catastrophic for the press.
David,
you should be ashamed of defending it.
James? What did I call you, James? David, I don't know how you can be so blithely dismissive of the fact that this was a piece, and it wasn't satire. It was in a national newspaper.
Do you mean satire can't be in the...
No, hang on a minute. It's not that well-known comedy column that we all read every week. It wasn't in private eye. It was in the...
Clarkson does do satire. That if you look at his TV programmes, when he goes abroad and he mobs up things, it's not meant to be taken as...
But that's not the problem. We can make fun of Meghan Markle all we want. We spend hours on this channel talking about Meghan Markle, criticising Meghan Markle, in some cases praising her. It was the fact that it was lined up in a misogynistic tone to talk about stripping a woman naked.
Do you mean to say we can't...
Stripping a woman naked and parading her through the...
Can we just be completely clear that we're understanding you correctly? If you have coarse satire... for example, if we'd had a scene that had Prince Harry being stripped naked and pelted with excrement, would that be OK because he was a chap? Is the fact... Let me finish. Is the fact that Meghan Markle is a woman a new protected characteristic, as you and Harriet Harman seem to want to make it? And you know what? I don't agree. I think in this new age of equality, the notion of misogyny deployed in this fashion is simply an excuse. You're a woman. She's a woman, Harman's a woman, Markle's a woman. You are competing in the public realm. You deserve to be treated as well and as badly as everybody else with no special protection.
But the fact is, we're not. As women, there is still massive systemic inequality within so many of our institutions.
Is that true?
The very
David mentioned satire in the 18th century, the Gilray cartoons, when you have members of the royal family and politicians, all male, with all sorts of body...
No. With women as well.
They have some.
Oh, no. Oh, come on.
The
mistresses... No.
With bodily
you don't know it well enough, Jake.
With everything... The politicians are all male.
Yeah.
With bodily
mistresses
with all sorts of things happening, they are...
No, the idea...
viciously rude, and that's part of our tradition.
The idea of stripping a woman naked and dehumanising her like that is a sexist trope. And you cannot say that that is not that's insightful in the sense that if we just went through...
Nobody was going back to do this.
Oh, sorry.
But you say no one would ever do this. We have an institutionally sexist police force. When I wake up in the morning, I'm told, carry something safe, carry your keys behind your fingers because you're unsafe. Women are not safe in this society yet, and until we are... we're not equal.
You deserve special protection. You were such... Jacob, you were such delicate flowers that if an abusive term is directed you all run together in a sisterhood, squeaming until you're thick misogyny. You make me thick, frankly.
Well,
let Amy have the final word.
Do you know what? I have no words left because...
Good.
Well, that's a first from any member of my panel. Anyway, let me know what you think, because I'm sure you've got words to say. mailmog@gbnews.com, I think. Coming up, should the government heed the will of the people and reverse its upcoming ban on new petrol and diesel cars in 2030? Plus, we'll be brushing up the ashes after the fiery display at Lord's over the weekend. But does courtesy trump the law?
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. Steve says Clarkson is very sardonic and has made a good living at it. However, he is entitled to his opinion. The lefties do not like anything that doesn't fit into their way of thinking. They should be banned, not Clarkson. I wouldn't ban them either, because I believe in free speech even for lefties. Ellen, how many complaints about Jeremy Clarkson had never watched Game of Thrones? People watched this unpleasant series but became pious when Clarkson paraphrased it. Well, I'm afraid I never watched Game of Thrones, though some people said it was very exciting. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is under pressure to delay plans to ban diesel and petrol cars by 2030. Manufacturers and industry leaders have demanded the Prime Minister rethink the extreme timescale, owing to the risk of major economic destruction and potentially hundreds of thousands of job losses, despite government plans for 300,000 charging point installations by 2030. The way things are going, currently only a third of charging infrastructure needed will be installed by the due date. Electric cars remain much more expensive, with your cheapest electric car on the market for about £20,000. And electric cars lack variability. According to Daily Mail poll, only 28% of the public are in favour of the ban by 2030. So not only are these plans unrealistic, but they do not have the public's backing. I'm joined now by someone who is in favour of these targets, TV presenter and motoring journalist Quentin Wilson. Thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure, Jacob.
First of all, motoring journalists are meant to be petrol heads, so how come you've become an electric head?
Are they? I mean,
just by reputation.
Where is it written, Jacob? So look, I supported, cutting fuel duty for a long time, and now we have the technology, so we don't have to rely on fuel. So we should look at this energy transition and try and think about how we pollute less in our cities and how we have energy security and cheaper energy for all. And that kind of begins with electric cars.
Look, I'm very keen on security of supply. I think that's fundamental. And also on lower prices, because actually every economy in the world does well on low energy prices
Absolutely.
and low transport prices. But at the moment, electric prices are high, electric cars are expensive, the batteries are very complex to produce, the minerals you need to produce them are hard to extract and costly. How do you think in 7 years we get to what you're proposing? Which I don't disagree with, but it's, can we get from here to there in this timescale?
Well, when you look at what's happened over the last 10 years, when I was driving a little Mitsubishi which did 50 miles to one charge, and here we are now, 10 years later, where we get 300 miles to one charge. So that race of technology is happening much, much faster than the internal combustion engine. So it's premature to say we're not going to reach these targets. We can see there are 1.2 million people out there with plug-in cars who have happily folded them into their lives, and they work. And if you talk about, you know, the Daily Mail survey, I've got 50 MPs and parliamentarians, peers, who support this change, who are backing my campaign for lower electricity prices, cut the VAT, 20% VAT on public charging, get in line with 5%. So the methodology of the Mail survey, I question. And I don't think, you know, people are against it. There are millions of people who are worried about pollution and who are worried about their future and expensive energy, as you say.
Yes, but if electric cars are going to be cheaper and the charging is going to be competitive, this will happen anyway. It doesn't need regulation to do it. We didn't need to have regulation to move from the horse and cart to the motor car.
But if we didn't have regulation, for instance, the California Air Resources Board mandating no benzene and lead in petrol, we would still be breathing that stuff in, Jacob. So sometimes to shift historic transitions, you do need a bit of a nudge. And if you leave, you know, companies to do what they've always done, we will burn what we've always burnt. And it, you know, these three pillars are energy security, clean air in our cities, and cheaper energy for all.
OK, but in the interim, aren't we actually missing out on cleaner energy? Because actually petrol engines are massively cleaner than they were 20 years ago. Shouldn't we carry on improving the technology that we've got and allow market forces to see this evolve and actually to see which competing technologies will really work in the end?
The petrol and the diesel engine has kind of reached its peak. You know, we've had this 100 years to make them clean, and you're still burning stuff. Stuff will still come out the exhaust pipe. And if we went up the top of this building and looked over London, there would be this orange pall of pollution.
But a lot of that is from diesel still, that we were encouraged to buy.
Completely,
and that becomes part of the further question on some of the minerals that are in the batteries. How polluting are they? What are the environmental consequences of digging them out? I see people now talking about digging them from the seabed to get the resources that are necessary. Are we really fully aware of the environmental risks that we may be taking with this rush to electric?
Well, if you take things like cobalt and lithium, which are the critical minerals, you know, 50% of all Teslas now have no cobalt in them, in their batteries. And we've been using cobalt to refine petrol and diesel for years and years and years. We will have sodium-ion batteries soon. We will have solid-state batteries. So that technological acceleration will change the batteries, and we'll use less rare earth minerals. And don't forget, nobody has quantified how many CO2 emissions are from exploring oil, drilling it, shipping it, refining it, distributing it. Nobody knows what that figure is, Jacob.
Yes, but then when you look at the carbon emissions on creating an electric car, you may have high carbon emissions because you have to assume that the energy you're using is renewable energy. But that's not an accurate assumption, is it?
Oh, in this country, we have, what, 40 to 50% of renewable energy in our grid?
But therefore 40, 50% that isn't. And so if you think of the waste in conversion of electricity into motor power, you are losing a considerable amount of the energy from carbon sources that you would if you were putting it directly into a petrol engine.
Then if you have a combustion car, you know, it loses 70% of its power before it gets to the rear wheels. I mean, it's massive.
Of course, but that's happening with the production of electricity in the first place as you go through the generators. So those losses are cumulative when you're still reliant on fossil fuels for the energy input.
But if you use a mix of hydro, wind, solar, nuclear, it's much, much better. And surely that's what we should be aiming for, instead of carrying on buying gas and electricity from monopolistic regimes who you know, will always charge more. Your story about the CMA, £1 billion we've been overcharged on petrol.
That's another story on whether we should use our own resources more, which I'd be very keen to.
Yeah.
But it's in a cost of living crisis. You see, I think people were very happy to move to electric and so on when the cost of living was low and it wasn't rising and everyone felt prosperous. But once you have inflation and people feeling less well off and they have to focus on the family budget more, then suddenly these things which sound good become unaffordable. And at the timescale, we are trying to be faster than anyone else.
Because we're thought leaders in this country.
Well, but then we're poorer.
Yes.
But that's no good. I don't want my voters to be cold and poor. I want my voters to be the most prosperous in the world.
But then they won't be if you're still buying gas from Russia and oil from Saudi Arabia.
We've got lots of our own gas, if only we'd get it from underneath us. We're sitting on it, which would be a sensible thing to do. But it's all about the standard of living of people in this country.
And the standard of living will be affected by taking off that yoke of expensive energy bought from monopolistic regimes.
But the petrol engine is still cheaper, and the petrol car is half the price.
If you look at a second-hand EV, like you can buy a Tesla for sort of £16,000, £17,000.
Yes, but perhaps I've read Giles Corran too much on the dangers of petrol cars.
Well, perhaps.
Anyway, whose experiences with his Jaguar are absolutely dreadful. As I have a very nice petrol Jaguar, I'm quite happy sticking to it. But thank you very much, Quentin. Thank you so much for coming in to join me. Coming up, more potential examples of corporate censorship bubble to the surface. And we'll be asking, should banks have the right to close accounts held by those with whom they disagree? And don't forget, UK-Australian relations are in crisis, as in the Bodyline tour. But who's at fault? The Homeland or the former Dominion?
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions, and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio, and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your thoughts, which I'm going to have to read off WhatsApp because the printer is jammed. Jammed today, run jammed tomorrow. Ian, the electric cars may be ready, but there is no way on God's earth the road, bridge and multi-storey car park improvements necessary to cope with the extra weights, the charging infrastructure or the massive increase in grid power capacity will ever be ready by 2030. Steve, we're just palming off our emissions to other countries. And Richard, unless the plan is to drastically reduce people's ability to own a car, which I would be very strongly against, by the way, but Richard suspects it may be, then the all-electric diktat will have to be abandoned as there is no possibility of adequate infrastructure to support such a thing. Well, thank you for that. Keep your views coming. As we discussed earlier in the programme, my fellow GB News presenter, Nigel Farage, revealed that the bank he's used for decades recently closed both his personal and business accounts for no stated reason. This also happened to a friend of the programme, Toby Young of the Free Speech Union, regarding his PayPal account last year. We had another guest on the programme last week, Mike Davidson, who had his charities bank account closed too, which they suspected was because of their religious position on LGBT matters. And lo, it came to pass over the weekend, yet another case of seemingly political corporate censorship emerged. An Anglican vicar, the Reverend Richard Fothergill, has accused the Yorkshire Building Society of closing his bank account after what he maintains was a polite rebuttal to gender ideology to the bank over their support for Pride Month. The bank itself completely denies the allegation and insists the relationship irrevocably broke down. But either way, it seems there is something of a recurring theme. Now, I'm joined by my panel, historian Dr. David Starkey and author and broadcaster Amy Nickel. David, surely your bank should have no interest in your political opinions.
But unfortunately, we now have banks, including Coutts, which the word was Nigel's bank, loudly advertising that they support Pride or BLM or whatever. In other words, taking up frankly political and, I would regard, as a gay man, socially extreme positions. So, of course, if a bank, as indeed much capitalism is doing in general, there's a series of making a profit, which many of them do, some of them don't, is no longer enough. We have to strike morally improving postures. So that's part of the story. I think the second is, of course, human resources. The fact that what is driving much of this through the bank is a particular recruitment of younger staff who are passionately committed and see, as it were, no separation between their workplace and the rest of their lives. And then there's a final point. I happen to bank with Coutts also. We received a letter not many months ago saying the bank would withdraw accounts if it felt the individual in question risked bringing the name of the bank into disrepute. This terrible phrase, this absolute catch-all phrase that's now being used begins within the professions. You as politicians are increasingly subject to it. The whole of our life.
Right. OK, well, I'm just going to go to Amy, but I also bank with Coutts, and I must confess I've banked with them since 1982, and they have been absolutely marvellous. I have nothing but praise for the way they've looked after me. And I've had a superb bank manager for a long time. Amy, do you think Jeremy Clarkson should have his bank account taken away for his atrocious behaviour?
No, this is what I think. First of all, I'm very envious you both bank with Coutts. I aspire to be able to bank with Coutts, to be honest. I think you're only telling part of the story here because you say that he had a polite rebuttal letter, but we haven't seen what he actually said, this reverend. And legally, they would have had to have a very strong justification.
Well, no, legally they don't. Legally, they can just close anybody's account. That's the problem.
Within a certain remit, where they said.
No,
but look at their response. They said
they deny it, but they have to.
But they've said they closed the bank account because of what he
irrevocably broken down. That's right.
But the thing is about it.
But Nigel, the Free Speech Union,
I do.
The sort of other people. I mean, is it politics or is it this ridiculous politically exposed persons regime which assumes that all politicians are on the take from...
Do you not feel a little bit like, for instance, with this reverend, if he's so opposed to the way that they operate, that bank operates, Wouldn't he rather take his money elsewhere anyway?
Unfortunately, because-
And luckily, we live in a society where there's plenty.
That's
more
not
banks.
true. Virtually every bank sponsors Pride. What is quite extraordinary is public institution after public institution now competes to be...
But forget the Pride thing. Nigel has tried lots of other places, and because he's a politically exposed person, none of them
Can we define that?
Yes,
Will
a
you-
politically exposed
will you
person
define the term?
Is an elected politician and their family. And so it's quite widespread.
But remember, just one second, it's really important that viewers understand this. It began in a very different sense. The original intention was to deal with money laundering.
Indeed, that's right.
That was the intention. Now it's been broadened into anything that might be suspicious. In other words, there's this constant sense of mission creep as this new... remember, I was in right at the beginning of Gay Pride, and it's important we understand this. We were a genuinely marginalised group. We were subject to highly discriminatory laws, and it was a fight worth having. What's now happened is, of course, a minority opinion has now inverted itself. It thinks it's a majority opinion, and it's enforcing itself as brutally, as monopolistically as the old morality did. And this is sad.
I simply cannot see.
We're going to have to move on, but Amy, I'll come back to you, because speaking of banks, news emerged over the weekend that might just explain the Bank of England's inept monetary policy. The Times obtained the Bank of England's 2022 submission to Stonewall's top 100 employer list, which revealed the Bank of England believes people of any gender can be pregnant. Well, we thought it'd be fun to see what Andrew Bailey looked like as a pregnant man.
Could you tell the difference?
Take a look. I actually await an invitation to his gender reveal party, whatever that may be. But on a more serious note, what would he look like if instead of identifying as a pregnant man, he identified as an affected governor of the Bank of England? Oh, my goodness, it looks just like Mervyn King, the last effective governor of the Bank of England. Amy, can't the Bank of England get on with its job and keep inflation down rather than saying that men can be pregnant when they quite clearly can't?
Jacob, they can and they are.
Men are pregnant.
Men are. You're getting a little bit confused, as you do, with your sex assigned at birth and the gender that you live. Right? The gender that you live.
No, I'm not.
No, you are.
Nonsense.
Well, who are all these trans men giving birth? Because they are.
Then they're still women if they're giving birth.
But then you're talking about biological sex.
They're medical monsters.
David,
They're mere Frankensteins.
Well, that is exactly the type of horrible language people used
not
about
true.
gay
It's just
men
true.
in the 80s.
It's just true.
And I think
it's
you should
just
be...
true. It's just true.
How can you call natural people living their natural lives something like that?
If a person comes along who is an ordinary person, says they want to be Napoleon, you don't say, there, we'll give you a coronation. You say, I think you really ought to see a doctor.
This is completely different.
If a man, the parallel is exactly...
Oh, my goodness, maybe to you, but the British Medical Association and the British Psychological Society disagree with you fundamentally, and in most countries now you have men, women, third gender. And actually, in your own House of Commons, when you look up MPs, it says, are you looking for a man, a woman, or third
But
gender?
you don't. And only women can give birth to children.
It's just so not true. When was
obviously
the last time
It's
we all
obviously
had our
true.
chromosomes checked? Because I would love it if you were an XXY.
Sorry, this is really, Jacob, this is simply rubbish. This is willful, fundamental, scientific misinformation.
But it's not.
And it is absolutely...
Well, why is it
if you let
supported
this
by...
woman continue, we will be...
This woman!
I thought that was a badge of pride.
We
will be subject to censorship.
I want to let Amy continue because I can't really believe that anyone thinks what you think. Oh, and you're not just teasing.
Could I
wind-up?
suggest there's a really lovely documentary called Seahorse about a man called Freddie who has a baby. A man has a baby.
But he
it
doesn't.
happens
He's
now.
a woman.
You
can't be a man if he has a baby.
He goes through life as a man. If you saw him in the loo, he would look like a man. He lives as a man. And do you know what?
Not if you looked very carefully.
I have been.
And not, I think, when he was giving birth.
I think you two are particularly obsessed with genitals, and it's not a good look. And actually, hate crimes against transgender people are going up.
I don't hate them. I just think they're
You don't understand them. And do you know something? Do you know
sad.
something that's so damaging for the trans community is being misgendered?
No, but I think they're completely entitled to do and say what they want. And that's absolutely for them to live their lives.
And they have a baby sometimes.
It's not for me to tell them how to live their lives. But you can't get away from the straightforward fact that only a woman can give birth to a child.
But you're reducing what socially
that is just
men, women.
Jacob, can I just say, I think you're being deeply unsympathetic to this very interesting argument, because every time you're in church and receive Mass according to the Catholic rite, you see a form of transubstantiation.
Yes.
You believe that because the priest utters words, therefore the bread...
I believe because God said it.
But
I believe because Christ raised from the dead.
You believe in a form of words. I think what Amy does, Amy believes in a similar miracle. I mean, what I think is fascinating is the extent to which science has been abandoned, and instead we just proclaim that because somebody says, I am a man or I am a woman, they are. And then we twist, we throw away 300 years of scientific...
David.
We produce rubbish about chromosomes. Once again, it's disgraceful.
When you were in the womb, what did you start off as? Why do you have nipples?
Well, we know all about that. That doesn't affect chromosomes.
No, quite.
It does.
David started off.
When's the last time? No, it's not that simple. It's not that simple. And there have been transgender people throughout society, throughout history, and most civilized societies now recognise that. We are one of few that does not recognise the third gender.
You tried once claiming transgenderism in Africa, South America.
I find this very difficult.
Hilarious.
In Brazil,
It's just funny. It's
I can't really believe
look up the
this.
status of trans people in Brazil, because
But
it's much
an
better than
interesting
here.
argument. Let me now say what the Bank of England has had to say. The bank is committed to being an inclusive place to work for all of its colleagues who are all dedicated to delivering monetary and financial stability. Well, they've done well at that. Thank you very much. Thank you also to my panel, who we will see next week. Coming up, it's the defining story of the weekend, the Ashes controversy. I was watching from the upper man stand and was joined by Alfred and Anselm, and was appalled by some of the behaviour, but not necessarily of the Australians.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
And action.
Sergeant, read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I continue to identify as Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. You've been getting in touch with your mail Moggs. Ray, these banks should be named and shamed so people can withdraw their custom. Banks have short memories of who bailed them out of the financial crisis and saved their jobs. The great British public. Ian, banks closing the accounts of people whose politics they disagree with is a very good reason why we must make acceptance of hard cash compulsory in all venues. Well, there's no ashes without fire, and there was plenty of fire at the Ashes over the weekend. The weekend's denouement concluded in a controversy that led to English fans vociferously booing and heckling the Australian players, and over came to an end, or nearly came to an end. And Johnny Bairstow, the hero from last week, who carried a Just Stop Oil protester off the pitch, left his crease. In a move that operates within the laws of cricket but is not considered the done thing, owing to the tradition of courtesy and decorum, the wicketkeeper stumped him. It's an event that might have taken UK-Australia relations to their lowest level since Bodyline, but perhaps I just see it that way as an avid cricket fan. The Prime Minister offered his opinion and accused the Australian players of breaking the spirit of cricket. But I'm joined now by Alexander Downer, former Australian Foreign Secretary and former enormously popular High Commissioner from Australia to the United Kingdom. Alexander, thank you so much for coming in.
Pleasure.
You won. Congratulations. Had you been captain, would you have upheld the appeal, or would you have thought, we've made our point, but appealing would be ungentlemanly?
No, I would. I'm trying to win the game, and I'm trying to win the game within the rules of cricket. And if my wicket-keeper stumped, particularly, interestingly, the England wicket-keeper, stumped him, I would hope that the umpire would agree with me that he's out. And but this is ultimately a matter for the umpire. I'd accept that, just as it was a matter for the umpire whether Mitchell Starc caught an England player on the boundary or whether he didn't. I mean, you just have to live with the umpire's
And do you think
decision.
that was part of it, that the Australians were very cross? Glenn McGrath absolutely furious about the Starc decision. And do you think that was part of it?
No.
Or do you think it's right?
They would have moved on.
You
You
think-
look, you just...
OK, so are the
if
English...
you're a professional sportsman...
Are the English just crybabies, as an Australian newspaper's called us?
That's not a good expression to use about a country that I love so much.
We're frightful snowflakes.
My wife is English, so I wouldn't like to use that expression. But it's a bad look when you have a really exciting game and you lose the game, and you don't complain about the umpire, you complain about the players who defeated you, whose appeals were upheld by the umpire. I would just say, for Australians and for people outside of the UK, it looks like bad losers. Whereas, you know, if you're defeated, and they were defeated quite heroically, particularly with Ben Stokes' massive innings there, if you're defeated, you take it with dignity.
Well, actually, I completely agree with you. I thought the worst part of it was not Australia appealing, but was the booing in the pavilion.
Yeah.
What were members of the MCC thinking about? The whole point of the MCC is that it's gentlemanly. And I apologise to the Australian players as only associate member of the MCC. I just thought that was the rudest thing. You may not want to applaud them, but for the MCC, when you're so physically close members, to boo, I thought was the worst bad manners.
So it's done the MCC's image a huge amount of damage, and you're right. I mean, I completely agree with you. The point of the cricket is that 2 test matches in this series have been very close and extremely exciting, gone the full 5, almost the full 5 days each time. It's been wonderful for cricket, but the MCC is the sort of guardian, if you like, of cricket. And when you've got members behaving like that, booing the players and crying out, cheat, cheat, not only is it extremely childish, But it transmits a very bad message about the MCC, and they've, I think, suspended 3
Quite rightly.
members.
The MCC officialdom has acted swiftly. Within the crowd itself, a little bit of banter is perfectly reasonable. I think the English, though not me or my sons, were chanting same old Aussies, always cheating, and they were replying...
Same old Aussies, always winning.
And they were replying...
That's what they should have been chanting.
Same old Barmies, always weeping. So I think the banter back and forth is fine.
Banter is fine.
But actually, shouldn't we have behaved like the New Zealanders? Do you remember the World Cup final, which we won because of an umpiring decision?
Yeah.
And afterwards, the New Zealanders made no complaint. They just congratulated us. And the Australians and the British, in this instant, can say the New Zealanders knew how to behave.
I think, I don't know, but I think most of your viewers, those viewers who are keen on sport, know that sporting events are sometimes determined, and this wasn't particularly actually, but are sometimes determined by umpiring or referee decisions. I mean, it is part of the game, and you have to live with the fact that sometimes these decisions go your way and sometimes they don't. The previous day, a decision did not go Australia's way. That day, a decision did. Should the wicket-keeper stump a batsman? Yes, that's part of the game. Johnny Bairstow tried exactly the same technique to stump Labuschagne 2 days earlier, and it was given not out, right? I accept that. It's the umpire's decision. That was a good decision.
But shouldn't the batsman wait till the call of over has come through? Now, you were very distinguished...
This is a matter for the umpire. The umpire, not the umpire. The game is a matter for the umpire, but this is a matter for the umpire.
In the 1930s, the Bodyline Tour, your predecessor as High Commissioner, there was a huge row between the Foreign Office and the Dominion of Australia, as it then was. We're not getting into that territory, are we? Australian-UK relations aren't being affected, even with the Prime Minister chipping in.
I think the British Prime Minister has chipped in, but the Australian Prime Minister would be well advised to use a cricketing expression to let this one just go through to the keeper.
Because after Bodyline, very good. After Bodyline, diplomatic telegrams did come back from Australia. They were really serious.
And the Australian Prime Minister, I think, was Joe Lyons at the time. He directly intervened to try to tone down the passions. Yes, there was great feeling about Bodyline. This is nothing compared to that, believe me, nothing.
Yes, well, nothing compared to Bodyline. There's a brilliant series that the BBC did that's available on YouTube on Bodyline. I recommend that to people. I don't know if you've ever watched it.
I have,
it's very good.
Incredibly interesting.
But Bradman, the most amazing cricketer. That ability to hit everything. But
I've watched an England-Australia Test match with Don Bradman.
Did you?
Sitting with him.
Sitting with him. I thought you weren't old enough to have watched him playing, but thank you, Alexander. My father did, but that's all from us. Up next is Professor Daniel Wooten. Dan, as a Kiwi, do you feel conflicted on this matter?
Well, I'm a British citizen, Jacob, but I have to say, I was on Sky News Australia this morning, talking with Peter Cridland, the former advisor to Tony Abbott, the Prime Minister there, and she wanted me to weigh in on the Ashes. And I said, absolutely not. This is just one battle that I'm keeping out of.
Excellent. That's coming up after the weather. I'll be back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation, and it'll be sunny in Somerset, as always.
Hello, many of us saw some fairly heavy showers on Monday, and it stays rather changeable as we head through the next few days. Staying on the cool side, yes, there will be some sunshine, but also further showers to come. We look at the pressure pattern then. Low pressure hasn't really moved anywhere fast, still centred towards the northeast of the country, and you can see here some fairly tightly packed isobars as well. That's what's keeping things fairly windy, and these weather fronts here, that's what's bringing some more organised showery outbreaks of rain. Now, that first band of rain is affecting much of Scotland through the evening and overnight, slowly pushing its way southwards, but some fairly heavy rain on that and breezy as well. Clear across the central areas of England, Wales, Northern Ireland, but to the south, another band of showery rain will spread in across southern counties of England and Wales as we head through the night. Temperatures in any clear spells will turn fairly chilly. Now, we got to a fairly bright start across this central slice, like I said, on Tuesday morning, but further outbreaks of rain continue to slowly spread its way southwards across parts of Scotland, Northern Ireland, Northern England, and quite a wet picture across parts of the south as we start Tuesday morning. Some further heavy rain to come, particularly across southeastern areas as we head through into the afternoon. But elsewhere, as I said, some sunshine, just a scattering of showers, but still on the cool side. I don't think winds will be quite as strong as they were on Monday, but still highs below average for the time of the year. So as we head through Tuesday evening and overnight, some further outbreaks of showery rain continuing across some southeastern parts. A bit of uncertainty about the exact timing of that clearance, but we could see another pulse of heavy rain spreading in across the far southeast. Elsewhere, though, many of those showers tending to fade away as we head through the night, just one or two continuing, and again under those clear skies, turning fairly chilly. As we start Wednesday morning then, probably a better start to the day across many southern parts compared to Tuesday morning. Some sunshine first thing, a drier start to the day across Scotland as well. Elsewhere, lots of sunshine to come, but it won't be long before further showers break out. And again, some of those could be heavy with a small chance of hail and thunder. And again, breezy around any showers, temperatures on the cool side. Quick look ahead to the rest of the week. It stays rather changed.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time